Hello and welcome to the Growth Advantage podcast. Today I'll be talking to Dr. Celie Hambright, the Scientific Director and Co-founder of Base State Longevity, a health optimization and wellness studio based in Aspen, Colorado. Base State Longevity is not a traditional spa. It's a space focused on boosting overall well-being, recovery and longevity through a range of modern evidence-informed therapies and services. Dr. Hambright, your background is truly impressive and it's lovely to have you here. With a PhD in the biology of aging and significant contributions to understanding neurodegenerative diseases, as a scientific director and co-founder of Base State Longevity, how do you bridge your deep scientific expertise with the practical, holistic approach that your company offers?
That's a great question, and it really kind of leads to the impetus for my entering into this space, quite frankly. But the bridging is easy because my interests were always in the application of the science itself.
Yeah,
We call that translational science, oftentimes, where you're doing research and innovative things in a laboratory to obviously to get to what we call the bedside to see the patient, etc. Typical sciencey things. I was writing manuscripts, and I still publish, and grants, etc. But what I was seeing was that it wasn't really democratized. We were doing research sometimes just to do research, and it wasn't seeing the light of day to some degree. And there was some really
right.
simple things that were really effective in a laboratory setting or in a preclinical setting or even a clinical setting that weren't really available and weren't really um, being advertised, if you will, or given to the public to some degree. So that was really my motivations, and in the way I apply my knowledge, if you will, or my background to translate it here to this into this wellness space and entrepreneurial space is really through education. To be honest, if I had to describe it simply, what I found with clients or patients that want to enter our programs, they really just want to find the good actors. There's a lot of bad actors in the space. There's a lot of snake oil in the space, and they really
Yeah,
trust the expertise of physicians and scientists and credentialed individuals, and they have a ton of questions. And so we kind of have a concierge medicine like approach that involves some coaching and some hand holding in a good way. And I really enjoy that element too, because I can inform and educate, and really help people reach their general wellness goals. And I try to do that with social media too. A lot of my
right.
content is, I would say, fairly accessible but educational, and I really like that role. I really lean into it, and I get to see patients or clients face to face and virtually as well. But it's quite enjoyable. So yeah.
Fantastic. And I think sort of leading on from what you've just spoken about there, could you elaborate on the implications of your PhD research at UT Health San Antonio and how that early work influences Base State Longevity's mission and how you translate such high level research into accessible and effective treatments for active living at Base State Longevity?
Sure. Yeah, there's various stops along the way in academia that you go through, so you go to graduate school, you do a thing called dissertation, you defend that dissertation. It's a big science project basically, and then you go and do what's called a fellowship or a postdoc, and you work in a new lab, you do different things, et cetera, and then you go on to be a PI in academia. So your question was incredibly relevant because there was some things I learned in graduate school, that first step when I was getting my PhD, that really highlighted this kind of ethos. Again, democratizing, anti-aging therapies or whatever. I'll give you one great example, and I wish I had a video because when I give talks and on these topics, I usually have a video that I talk about on this
Right.
topic. And in brief, for my dissertation, we published this in a series of papers. We developed what's called a transgenic mouse model. We had a mouse that we could turn genes on and off. We could make them sick or make them better, et cetera. I cared about neurodegeneration and I cared about what made neurons die. So we could turn these switches on and off and to better understand the mechanism of why these neurons are dying in these disease cases. But what we found was we could give these mice a neurodegenerative disease or kill some neurons, and we could rescue that genetically. We could rescue that with other kinds of therapeutics that we were examining in the lab. But one of the best tools we found to rescue this, what we call a phenotype, this neuronal cell death, was actually vitamin E. And the reason was this is a lipophilic vitamin, commonly available, obviously. And the reason was the reason these neurons were dying was through a process called lipid peroxidation. It's an oxidative stress signal or product. In as we get older, we get higher levels of oxidative stress. That's a common
Right.
kind of cause of aging and age related symptomology. But we could give them vitamin E, which neutralizes lipid peroxidation. We could rescue that phenotype. We would kill less neurons, and they would walk better. They would think better. There's tests that we
Mm.
would use to measure that. And they performed very, very well. So we could rescue, we called it, this phenotype, which was neuronal cell death and eventually death of the animal, actually. It was painless, by the way. They were just demented. But vitamin E worked so well. And this is there's been trials with vitamin E and neurodegenerative diseases and
Yeah.
different doses and supplementations. And they actually have pretty promising data at mitigating that further cognitive decline. But the moral of the story was I was blown away that there's this simple thing that I feel like every primary care physician should be putting every patient 65 and older on a good dose of vitamin E, a safe dose, obviously with blood work involved, et cetera, as this is a very cheap and available therapeutic, if you will, a common vitamin that really does a great job of getting it into the brain, crossing the blood-brain barrier, and then reducing this age-associated signal that leads to
Mm.
neuron death. So
Interesting.
that was one thing you asked, what did I learn early on, or what did I learn in my training? That was the first time. I have several of these stories. That was the first time where I realized, man, this should be a part of every program or protocol that you have is testing micronutrient levels in patients, and also prescribing or supplementing with these micronutrients or these vitamins, just as an overall longevity tactic or tool. Not to mention all the other pharmacologic approaches we could talk about. And I was just blown away that wasn't taught, or that wasn't so part of common standard of care. Because these mice were dramatically different. The videos are pretty interesting to watch. Yeah.
Amazing.
So that again, to answer your question, that democratization, that availability, that that uh, that the knowledge that can be given to the clients that are coming in. Let's not just give you an IV. Let's explain why this is working. Let's explain the regimen you should be on. Let's get some blood work associated with that. And there's some really common and easy things you can do to improve your health as you age.
Really interesting, it's
Yeah, yeah.
fascinating. And obviously, like you say, it's such a simple thing. For example, the vitamin E.
Hmm.
It's really interesting, to hear how sort of that early research and findings that you've used has gone into building this sort of business and what you offer. And obviously, base state longevity's core philosophy is to provide a better base state of being through a combination of natural and clinical methods. How do you ensure that all of your offerings, from, say, IV drip compounds and supplements to bath products, meet your exacting standards and are scientifically grounded?
Oh, everything is evidence based. And some of the evidence is really old. Again, vitamin E, we've known about that mechanism of action for a long time. We know why vitamin E is important, etc. Um, and then even some of the biomarkers we'll look at are fairly common, most of them. And so that's all. And again, even on our website, I put together a science page, if you will, that kind of describes some of the benefits of some of these holistic therapies and the evidence that supports that. So that comes first. When it comes to medicine as a whole, obviously, and our medical director would say the same thing. It's safety first, then compliance. Obviously, we get our therapeutics and they're sourced from obviously a compliant source, or good pharmacies if it's a compounded medication. And then so evidence is second. So safety, and then evidence for efficacy. But more importantly, it's personalized and curated. This is where I think we differ a little bit. I mean, I think there's some good companies in this space, but we try to, if we have a program that the client's in, couple everything we do with biomarker assessments or baseline blood testing, and blood testing kind of routinely throughout, so we can really, to some degree, test the efficacy, but also ensure that, again, safety is there, and we can see improvements in certain markers that we really care about. And again, these are evidence based markers, for inflammation, for example, or even oxidative stress, for example. So it's a combination of the evidence based practice with safe and compliant methods. And the big difference is the checking in, if you will, and the programs or the protocols. We call it testing, tracking, and repeating. Test, track,
Right.
repeat. And that varies per individual, and for every individual's goal. And for some of the therapies that we do get into in my other company, which we can talk about, it's a telemedicine company where we use peptide therapies. That's even more important. because the peptides is a gray space. You want to make sure you're using the right compliant peptides, obviously compounded at a good pharmacy that follows FDA standards. And so, yeah, that's always part of the process, safety and an evidence based for sure.
Absolutely. Like you say, that's crucial to ensuring that what
Crucial.
reaches the
Yeah.
consumer is,
Yep.
safe for use and is beneficial to them. Obviously, base state longevity targets fundamental aspects of aging, such as cellular aging, genetic wear and tear, and inflammation. For our audience, could you explain how these processes contribute to age-related conditions and how your approach addresses them effectively?
Absolutely. Yeah. So in my world, there's a school of thought called the geroscience hypothesis. There's different names for it, but we'll use the geroscience hypothesis. It's been coined by different people, namely Stephen Ostad, who actually was from my institution, the Barshop Institute. And we subscribe to that, or I subscribe to that as a scientist. And what that means is that if you treat aging as a disease as a whole, you try to target mechanisms that are associated with biological aging, you can then mitigate the symptoms that occur with aging or the comorbidities. So if you target the mechanism of aging itself, you can then reduce the chance or the probability of getting these age-related diseases like a cancer or an osteoarthritis in joints, or cardiovascular disease, etc. The source or the etiology of these problems is really the mechanisms at the cellular level, oftentimes that are associated with aging. And so, what are some of those mechanisms? There's various different thoughts on the main causal elements of cellular aging. We definitely know that DNA damage and disruption to repair is a big one of those. We know senescence is huge. A lot of my research has been in senescence, actually, in the biologic space, but understanding cellular senescence, and that's when a cell becomes a bad guy cell. Basically, it spits out
Yeah,
pro-inflammatory factors. It's a kind of a dysfunctional cell. And a real true etiology, if you really had to pick one, that is the cause of age, aging, and age-related diseases would really be inflammation. Um, we call it sterile inflammation, which means it's just kind of a chronic low-grade inflammation. It's not due to infection or anything. It's due to some of these bad guy cells I mentioned, these senescent cells, and just dysfunctional cellular behavior. And that occurs through the release of these different factors from cells that promote inflammation. And it becomes chronic in this kind of snowball effect or cascade of chronic inflammation. And that leads to oxidative stress, which then leads to more inflammation, which then leads to more DNA damage inside the cell, et cetera. It's kind of a lot of overlapping synergistic effects.
yeah.
These are all what we call hallmarks of aging. So in brief, as I subscribe to the geroscience hypothesis, that is target mechanisms of aging to target the decline associated with aging, we care about things like oxidative stress and inflammation and senescence. And we can test that. We can test those proxies in blood. We can target those mechanisms with different therapeutics, even simple therapeutics. There's some natural compounds that have potent senolytic activity, for example. They target those senescent cells. I've done a lot of research on fisetin and published using fisetin in preclinical models to demonstrate that. So we can again test the patient, understand what mechanisms they're dealing with that are promoting aging, and target those processes physiologically. And in theory, obviously mitigate the probability of the age-associated comorbidities that will come from those things. So again, targeting aging, treating it as kind of a disease as opposed to the old school Western medicine way of treating individual diseases, like heart disease versus dementia, for example. We think those are all intertwined. And
Right.
inflammation really is a key overlap for sure, but there's different reasons why it exists in those scenarios. But yeah, we like to target the source, if you will.
Sure. And what sort of age range do you start working with? What sort of is the optimal age to start looking into this kind of treatment?
Oh, I get that question a lot. I mean, in the past, in the biology of aging community, scientific community, we used to kind of have like a fuzzy threshold of what is an older individual, right? And we that would be 65 plus. A lot of the statistics are from 65 plus, et cetera. And that's when you really start to see these age related problems. We now know a lot more scientifically, mechanistically, physiologically, that there's not just a single peak. There's not an age threshold. There's actually a couple of peaks in your lifespan where you get the accumulation of deficits at the cellular level that lead to these age-related pathologies. There's been some really high impact reports that have demonstrated with large population studies that we have a one peak at around the early 40s where you see incidents of these kinds of things popping up, these age-related diseases like an osteoarthritis, again, a heart disease, whatever. And it happens again around that 60 to 65 plus. So it's not as simple as like, this is when you get old. It seems to have multiple different peaks with somewhat different mechanisms that are like promoting those peaks. So to answer your question, the earlier the better. The science really suggests for many of these diseases, especially neurodegenerative diseases, that we're really, really good or have the most evidence, I would say, to support the preventative element or to support prevention of this symptomology and prevention of this disease progression than reversing that signal, right?
Right. Yeah.
So the earlier the better. But that doesn't mean you would treat a 35-year-old like you would a 55-year-old.
Sure.
But I always suggest some good blood work, some good understanding of your physiology, and optimizing your inflammation levels and oxidative stress levels, and really insulin or glucose regulation as well, even in your 30s,
Right.
at mid 30s or so. I'm not saying a specific number because the earlier the better. I think the 20s is probably kind of young, but what I'm really trying to highlight is that it's almost not too early to think about these things,
Yeah. Definitely.
because
I
then you
can
can
understand that.
mitigate everything. And so, and we would approach it differently. It's all approach individualized too. We do blood work on everyone that comes into a program, but we're now learning in the scientific community that even as early as the early 40s, you're starting to see some significant signs of cellular aging, at least in glucose dysregulation, et cetera. So really, it's good to take a peek as early as possible.
Absolutely. And how about women going through menopause and perimenopause? Do you see a lot of people coming to you during that period of their lives, and do they suffer with inflammation, etc., which where they could
Yeah,
benefit from coming to you?
absolutely. And again, everything I'm saying is my opinion. We have a medical director that's a physician that oversees all these things. I'm not
Yeah.
trying to play doctor here. I mean, I'm a doctor, but like not a physician.
Yeah. Sure.
And for our telemedicine company, also a couple different MDs, because what you mentioned is very common. And so what I would be worried about is there's the hormone balance aspect, which is guided by a physician, guided by blood work. You want to normalize these hormones, and it actually works very, very well. Using a bioidentical hormone to compensate for a depleted hormone levels, well, actually in men or women, it's significantly beneficial for the long term effects that could come from that. So what I think about immediately when you say that is bone loss or bone density loss or frailty that is can be exacerbated with older age, especially in menopause, in women. And so we want to target that because if you're frail, frailty is really hard to reverse. And
Right.
we actually have an idea what leads to some of those frailty um, problems, if you will, at the cellular level. I mean, senescence actually plays a role in that as well. You can actually target that, the senolytics. And so, again, we'd approach it by getting the hormones in balance, tracking patient symptoms, which is as simple as kind of how do you feel. With especially with hormone balance, it's a lot of it is how you feel. There's not a tried and true. You need to have this ratio of free test to total test, or FSH to LH, or this total amount or this number. It's usually pretty individualized, which is why we have great physicians on our team that can manage this medicine. But yeah, it's very important. We see that a lot. We try to use bioidentical peptides, or I'm sorry, bioidentical hormones to normalize those values. Again, this is
Yeah.
perimenopause and menopause. If
Yeah.
you're dealing
Sure.
with subfertility or infertility or trying to conceive, that's a whole different conversation. Um, but the thing that comes to my mind is the mitigation of frailty. With these hormone imbalances, that can oftentimes lead to bone density loss, and that's hard to reverse, and it's hard to heal. So with bone density loss, you're more predisposed to fracture or damage of any kind, even in soft tissues like cartilage. And then with that, it's harder to heal too. So everything is becomes problematic. Again, that snowball effect. So we really target that a lot. We think it's a very common target, a very common complaint. And we test hormones at every blood panel we do. We can do a
Right.
deeper dive in a hormone panel for women or men, but certainly at baseline, your typical hormone panel is measured for sure.
Fantastic. Now,
Yeah.
as a scientist, entrepreneur, and naturopath, you possess a unique blend of perspectives there. What do you see as the most promising advancements in the field of longevity and anti aging? And how is Bay State Longevity integrating these into its future offerings?
I mean, how much time do you have? Because um, I get this question a lot too, and there's two types of answers. One is there's some answers that are exciting on the scientific forefront. The FDA is not allowing us to do for good or bad reasons. There's an interesting technology that I think will be the future, which we could talk about briefly. That would be probably RNA therapeutics, RNA technology. In fact, the COVID vaccine was an mRNA vaccine. We can do amazing things with this small nucleic acid to really modulate signaling in different cells. Again, this is a new type of medicine. The FDA doesn't love that for good reason. And so there's a lot of testing to be done, trials, et cetera. But if you're asking about the future, like modalities in which will work, I think RNA therapeutics are certainly on the forefront and will work well. DNA editing is actually incredibly easy to do now using CRISPR
Right.
technology. You can humanize that actually really easily. There's compliance barriers to that for obvious reasons that exist for good reasons. But if you're asking what the future is like, I think this modifying DNA, using this technology, which is actually quite simple at this point, fairly simple at this point. That's a future, I think, interventional strategy, especially for the genetic the diseases that have genetic predispositions or genetic drivers. Um, so that I think that's going to be the future for sure. Um, but what's kind of available now that I think is really moving the needle, I think, are two things. I am biased because I studied both of these things and have published on both of these things. One is the use of both allogeneic and autologous biologics, especially in the orthopedic space. With my new company, we will have a on-site clinic where we'll use some of these therapeutics. But the optimization and use of bone marrow derived biologics, for example, even adipose derived stem cell enriched biologics work really, really well. There's some things in the past that I think stifled the progress for efficacy in those spaces, but I think the community as a whole is really kind of learning what those were, learning more about how to use these therapeutics more
Yeah.
um, in a better way. It's a long story, but like trying to be brief. And so I think this regenerative medicine space will be a huge boom. Um, and I think honestly, an easy one that I certainly believe in is senolytics. We now know senescent cells are driving age-related conditions, pathologies, and symptoms. We know that senescent cells are bad generally. There are some exceptions, a long story. But if we can mitigate the senescent cells, and more importantly, what the senescent cells are producing, which are these pro-inflammatory, anti-regenerative products, and we can do that in a safe way that's really healthy as you age, as a general statement. There's a variety of senolytic drugs like fisetin I mentioned earlier, or quercetin, that work really well over the counter if you get them from a good vendor. And it's a very good interventional strategy that can really help reduce inflammation, reduce senescent cell burden, and I think can improve a healthy lifespan or a health span. So that was four different ones. Two are kind of like emergent technologies that aren't really available. And then two, I think we'll see a big shift in the regenerative medicine space and certainly the use of senolytics and those two combined as well. And I will say, I feel like that's coming because a lot of the legislation in various different states kind of highlights the new way of thinking in terms of
Yeah.
allowing for some of these regenerative medicine tools, these stem cell based tools, like in Florida or Montana or Texas. There's various laws that kind of give more allowances to the physicians to use
Right.
these stem cell enriched products in a compliant way, which I think is a good thing.
It sounds like a really exciting time, both now and in the near future, in the industry, which, hopefully all of these things will have come in to have a positive effect on people going through that aging process. Given the meticulous nature of your product development and vetting process, are there any operational aspects such as supply chain management, quality control, or customer data analysis where you've identified perhaps bottlenecks or areas for increased efficiency on that side of the business?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably not the best person to ask in some ways. I'm not operations lead, if you will, but but I will say the first thing that comes to mind when I hear that is it has to do with some of our marketing campaigns and some
Yeah,
of our marketing needs, if you will. So, like in terms of getting people in the door, that's always, I think for any business, it's the
yeah,
case, but
sure.
that's always a hurdle for sure. And we're in a very unique place. And again, I have this the telemedicine company that's virtual, but the Bay State Longevity here in Aspen is in a really unique area. We're in Aspen, Colorado, so it's a very transient town. It's a small town, and so getting that foot traffic is certainly still a hurdle. And how do you market to the people that are visiting, properly? And how do you have the services available there that they want? And even just from an inventory perspective, where it's like we ordered X amount of NAD. We're pretty good at this now, but in the beginning, like we had X amount of this therapeutic that expires, obviously. They all have
Right, yeah.
expiration dates. And so how do we predict the influx of people needing that? So in terms of like optimization of our operational flow and needs, I mean, I almost think that being more predictive of the foot traffic, which is really a marketing question,
Yeah,
and understanding what our needs are on the inventory side and procurement side would be very beneficial. I think there's some AI tools that can help us with that too. But at the same time, we're such a unique place. Sometimes I feel like the lessons learned here in Aspen wouldn't really be applicable to other places because
right,
it's just such
yeah.
a unique place and it's unpredictable in that way. There's pros and cons to being here. That's one of the cons.
Sure, I
Yeah,
understand that. How do you
yeah.
currently I know you said you're not on the operational side as much, but, could you give kind of an idea of how you approach that marketing and client acquisition, and how you reach your target audience and educate them about sort of what you're offering and sort of the benefits to them?
I wish I knew the answer. I'll tell you what we're doing, but I'm not going to pretend like I have all the answers here. It's an
Sure.
ongoing process. But one thing we're doing differently. I mean, this is kind of like esoteric and boring, but one thing we're doing differently recently that I think is working pretty well is a lot of our content, video content, social content, even some on the website, highlights the experience within our studio. We offer holistic therapies and private sauna and cold plunge rooms and lymphatic massage, etc. And so we were finding people didn't know those things even existed. They were just saw the IV center or whatever. So we have some video content that has actually people doing these services in a very, I think, artistic way. That sounds really simple, but in the beginning we were just trying to like list what we had. It actually is better to show. We probably should have known that. That seems pretty
Yeah,
straightforward. But like a lot of our content is shifted towards, I think, in an elegant way, demonstrating the experience, not just the offerings, but like
yeah,
experience, the patients walking through, doing the thing, getting out of the sauna, putting the towel on, whatever. And another thing for us is kind of a grassroots marketing campaign, kind of guerrilla style. But we have events here in Aspen. Again, this
right,
is a very very touristy place. When there's big events, like there's an event this weekend, for example, a festival, we will do a very targeted meta ad approach that finds these individuals,
right,
and really in a very targeted way, put a lot of effort, resources, and time into like the meta ads at that time around that event, highlighting the services that those people attending that event might be interested in. Again, this sounds simple, but like it took us a little bit to figure this out. So instead of like having meta ads always running, they're very targeted towards that event type. So this is a music festival, it's a younger crowd. We might highlight the recovery IVs, because
right,
you might have
yeah.
had a long night out. We have an event here in town called Snow Polo, which is really interesting and fun. It's great. That happened a couple of months ago. Actually, Prince Harry was playing in it. It was cool.
Oh,
We
cool.
actually hosted an event there, and we had a little pop up. But what we did around that was we mentioned all these additional services. This is a higher end clientele that goes to this event, so they
Yeah,
care about
sure.
like they're here for a little bit longer. They care about massages and the actual contrast therapy, some of those kind of recovery elements. Not so much hungover as much as being catered to, like a nice massage, etc. So we kind of pinpoint our services for those events that are here and use meta ads to target those individuals. And that seems to be working pretty well. And in the aggregate, it kind of highlights to more people all the services that we offer.
Sure. And it totally makes sense. Like you say, it's such a unique area to be in and clientele which obviously churn over more
Mhm.
regularly than perhaps in other areas. So that pinpointing is obviously crucial to you. Um, And also, once you have the clientele through the door, in the realm of personalized health, how do you manage and analyze individual client data to tailor treatments and recommendations to them? And are there any aspects of this process that are particularly time consuming or could benefit from advanced analytical support, for example?
Certainly on the data side, if you will, could always use support. And we've actually we're in talks now with a couple of different AI platforms to help us on that front. So, part of your question is like you have someone that's in a programmatic protocol that comes in, gets blood work, does this for 3 months, comes back, gets more blood work, does HBOT. I mean, as a scientist, I'm obviously trained to collect that data, analyze it, interpret what that might mean, et cetera. But we could always use better tools to help do that. And there's actually some aid we found in kind of the accountability index for those patients,
Right.
and keeping track of them, and more importantly, integrating all the different data inputs that are different types, like an API for physiological data, where we have genetics, we have microbiome, perhaps. We have stuff from their wearables, maybe. We do brain scans as well. So we have EEG data. So grabbing that and then drawing inferences and also kind of just curating that into a singular kind of report. We're working with a couple of again platforms now that help us with that. So we did see that as a gap. It kind of became a time sink for me where I'd have to basically take all that in manually to some degree, using some basic tools, and then draw some conclusions and have meetings with the client. There are a variety of tools that can help us build protocols, that are very iterative, and they can learn with the client, and again take in all those different data types. That's a huge plus for us, and I think anyone in this space should certainly consider aid in that space.
Yes.
Some AI based tools, especially to help, again, accumulate all that, curate all that, and and to a large degree actually interpret a lot of that. I mean, at the end of the day, the medical director and I will do final interpretations, but that initial screening, initial curation is really important. And then from like just the operational side of things, um we do we're small, so we do a pretty good job, but to retain clients, we found, this is not shocking at all, the better their user experience is, the more they want to come back and buy more packages, just for like the therapies or something. That's outside of what I'm there for. This is like the basic kind of membership for saunas and cold plunges. But what we do is we almost have too many personnel on staff there in a good way. So we have our front desk trained very well to be very attentive to our clientele. We are in Aspen; they kind of expect that. And there's a lot of hand holding. We'll show them to their room. We'll ask if they have any questions. Do they want some water, or tea, etc. So I think we retain clients, or make our clients pretty very happy with those kinds of attention to their names and where they're from, and kind of guiding them. Even if they've been there before, we still promote like literally walking them the 12 feet to the room and walking them the door, again asking if they want some tea. Those kind of simple businessy things are great for retention. But the biggest like tools we found that were useful were, again, were those oftentimes AI based tools to help us integrate all that data. A lot of it's physiological data, but you know there's so much at your fingertips now if you want to learn about yourself, from microbiome to, again, to genetics to your inflammatory blood biomarkers, yada yada. But those are all different data types and different data formats. Um, AI has been huge to help us extrapolate that and put that together. And we're not perfect yet. We're doing this now, kind of version 2.0. But there's some really good platforms that exist that help us with that a lot.
Fantastic. It's great to hear, that you're adopting these new technologies in order to streamline your processes, etc.
You
But
have to. You
yeah,
have to. Yeah.
absolutely. It, but again, it's such a minefield out there. There's so many different things that you can use.
Mhm.
It sometimes can be quite difficult to identify sort of the right products and the right tools to use, can't it?
That's where the human element is still so important. And that's
Yeah,
what
of
we would
course.
claim. At the end, we will use these tools to again help curate, organize, and interpret. But at the end of the day, it's the medical director and I that are really doing final interpretations and that final bit of guidance. So it's concierge medicine still. But what they don't know in the background is we use some really smart tools, and AI, even ChatGPT just does a fantastic job at this, to get us going in the right direction. And without that, we're not scalable. I mean, we're a small company now, so it's okay. But if we didn't incorporate these tools, we wouldn't be able to do anything at scale. And one of the platforms, again, builds out protocols based on all those data inputs and does it in an automated way. And it does a really great job. And everything is reviewed by a human, obviously, but that knocks out a lot of time. So the efficiency index is so much higher.
Fantastic. And finally, what is one key piece of advice you would offer to someone looking to proactively manage their own aging process and achieve a more vibrant base state of being?
It all starts with some physiological testing. I mean, there's obviously lifestyle is a whole conversation that's really important. I mean, we all have our recommendations there, and healthy living is where it all begins. But when anyone comes in and they want to be part of a program or protocol, they have the question like, "What do I need to work on?" There's some medical history for sure. Obviously, every person's different. I'm speaking generally here. I mean, if you have Hashimoto's disease, you're going to be treated a little bit differently, clearly. But it all starts with some physiological testing, and that's even curated too. I mean, if someone has low energy levels and they can't figure it out, we're going to test their micronutrients. We may do some genetic testing too to see if they're methylating properly or something. But these baseline physiological tests, oftentimes just blood work, is I think underutilized, and blood work is cheap, uh, very reasonable. It's very easy, just basic blood work. You got to start by getting a snapshot of your physiology to understand how to improve. And then again, you have metrics therein which you can track to demonstrate that it's working. And that's a big motivational tool as well. We're measuring various different markers, but if you measure like an interleukin profile of someone that's not the most healthy and they're in their 50s or 60s, you're going to see that you're going to have elevated levels of certain interleukins that are very pro-inflammatory, like a 6 or a 4 or 12, or even like TGF beta or interferon or something. Hopefully not interferon, but it could be. But you'll see this, and you know that when you do these interventional strategies, whether it's just saunas and cold plunges and some lifestyle changes, you're going to see reductions in those markers, even just CRP, which is just a common inflammatory marker, and it motivates the client a lot because they see
Yeah.
that quantitative, non-subjective metric that's changing. We can see this in EEGs with brain scans as well. So like that's what's kind of nice. Like I care about the data obviously, and I care about patients feeling better and clients feeling better. But it's very motivating for them because they're seeing these changes. They're like, oh, this is great. I feel better for one, and two, my values look better. They're more optimal or normalized.
Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah,
can relate to that in sort of things with weight loss and exercise, etc. That feeling that you get when you know you've achieved something, and then you start to see that needle move, and
right.
there's actual some physical results, and also data to back it up. So I can totally relate
Yeah,
to what you're saying there. Um,
absolutely. It's a human thing. I mean, Tim Ferriss famously said like people are more concerned about losing progress, not gaining progress. So they're much more motivated about losing something that they've gained than trying to gain something. Like the carrot at the end of the stick is fine, but as a motivator. But if you have lost some weight, the fear of putting it back on is a much higher motivator. So if you're seeing this progress, you don't want to go backwards, right? My CRP is going
Absolutely.
down, I'm feeling better. It's easier to work with those clients too because they're already kind of motivated. So
Absolutely, I can
yeah.
totally relate to that. Yeah,
Mhm.
and well, Dr. Hambright, I'd really like to thank you for joining us today on the Growth Advantage podcast. Your insights into the science of longevity and the mission of base state longevity has been truly enlightening, and it's clear that your dedication to combining rigorous scientific research with a holistic approach is paving the way for a new era of wellness. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise and vision with our audience, and thank you ever so much for joining us on the show today.
Absolutely, Rebecca. Thanks for having me.